Belle Epoque, the beautiful age. The Art Nouveau movement and the Belle Epoque was everywhere. It was in the advertisement. It was in the production of things from hairbrushes to pins that we would put in our hair. And it was actually in the movie stars too. Yeah, there were silent movies at this time during Art Nouveau. And if you look at this beautiful, beautiful French girl, she has all of the trimmings and characteristics that make Art Nouveau Art Nouveau. Look at her hair is made out of lines. Well, not really, but if we were going to draw it, there's many, many, many lines. The focus is on her beauty. And she has a natural looking kind of crown with a big pearl hanging from it on her head, like a princess. And it's very fairy-like, it's very dreamlike. That's what Art Nouveau was about. It was a fantasy. It was really beautiful. It's amazing to me how beautiful these girls were and how they all have this look of living in a fairy world, an unreal world. This actress, her name was Maud Feely, and she was a silent movie star. She's American. And on one of the little forward link arrows, you can see her in an old silent movie and in some of the other movies that she played in until she became an old woman. And the other one is a tribute somebody made for her, and it's just beautiful pictures of her. She was amazing. But of course, we're going to look again at why this was Art Nouveau and why it was a movement. It's Art Nouveau because of the focus on line and nature and natural beauty. Okay? And there is a dreamlike quality to it. It's fantasy. And it's a movement because of the fact that Art Nouveau was in the movies, in the way people did their hair, the way that they dressed, the way that they built their buildings, the way that they built the entrances into their subways. It became the predominant style of the era, and much of it still exists today. What is Art Nouveau? Art Nouveau was a movement in art history that flourished between 1890 and 1910 throughout Europe and the United States. And by the way, there's some Art Nouveau in Mexico, in Mexico City to be specific, and in Cuba, in Havana to be specific. What is an art movement? An art movement is a reaction to changes in the world amongst prominent artists. What was Art Nouveau reacting to? Art Nouveau was reacting to academic art, the strict teaching and control of the professional artist in famous European art academies during the 1700s and early 1800s. Nouveau artists were reacting to paintings like this masterpiece. Art was supposed to be about great battles and heroic moments in history for the academics. Art was supposed to flatter emperors, kings, queens, and the nobility. Napoleon looks a very definition of heroic in this beautiful painting by Jacques-Louis David, French, circa 1797. Art was supposed to teach moral lessons about being a good person. This young woman is taking off her fine jewels because being vain or having vanity was considered a sin. This kind of storytelling with pictures is called an allegory. Academic art, and remember that was before the Art Nouveau movement, was supposed to remind people of their ancient past. In order to understand the meaning of the painting, you have to know the ancient mythology of Greece and Rome. This is Spring by Sandro Botticelli, one of my favorite artists. He was born way before that time. In 1445 to 1510, he painted in Italy. But look at his work, it's so beautiful. I love it. If academic art was going to be about making people look heroic or reminding people of the mythology of their ancient past or teaching them lessons through allegorical paintings, academic art was supposed to remind people of their faith. Now, only wealthy people back then could afford art. The artwork would be displayed in churches, palaces, castles, and the estates of noblemen, not like today where we can buy reproduced art anywhere for very inexpensive, because we have machines and technology that they did not have at that time. Everything was hand done. Between the years of 1890 and 1930, 1910, in the age of the Art Nouveau artists, the world had changed dramatically since those old-fashioned days we were just looking at, the days of the old academic artists. Look at this picture. There's hardly any technology, and you can tell that where they're playing in that square, it looks kind of muddy and dirty. But the buildings are very beautiful. The architecture is very nice. This is a photograph of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France. The Eiffel Tower was built for a world exposition. That was like a big, huge, temporary Disneyland that would be erected to show off how advanced cities were. Cities like Chicago in America had them also. And so here we have a beautiful picture, and certainly at this time, the Art Nouveau artists were very proud of their city. Paris, France was the absolute artistic center of the universe. Can you believe that we have a photograph from New York City in 1880? Look around. Look at the streets are not paved. As far as transportation goes, I see a lot of um, horses pulling carts, and I do see some like streetcars, which is very amazing. So at this time in 1880, people felt very modern, not like the people of the past. Check it out. This is a photograph of building the Brooklyn Bridge, and that was in the 1800s. Doesn't that blow your mind? That even back then, we were becoming so far technologically advanced. This is a news photo from about 1900, circa 1900, that you see down at the right hand side of the little stripe. Circa means like circa, it means about. And this is a news photo, and this is of an opera house. Look at how elaborate it is and how fancy. Notice the men that you can see if you look very carefully. They're wearing top hats and they're dressed very fancy. Going to the opera was a big thing. Remember, there was no technology for radio or movies or anything like that. Going to the theater was a great big deal. You've got to remember that before the Industrial Revolution, a time of immense change, a big, huge boom in technological learning and application, that every single thing had to be done by hand. This is a French painting done in the 1600s. And you can see that the peasant who's got a handful of seeds to put into the furrows that have been plowed, he doesn't look real happy. Life was really difficult and uncomfortable for people, and the Industrial Revolution helped to make life a lot easier for human beings. The Industrial Revolution. Now, check out this picture. You can see that there's horses, and you can see that there's like a walled city, and you can see that there's smokestacks emitting a ton of dark, heavy smoke. The Industrial Revolution, although it made life a lot easier for people, it really did come with some costs, and one of them was air pollution. People started learning that if you burn coal, coal burns way hotter than regular firewood, and with that extra hot fire, you could make things like steel and you could forge iron, which is much stronger than the other metals that they were using at the time, like copper or bronze. Bronze is made from aluminum and tin. Now, so all of that good technology helped to make things stronger, and you'll see some more of the technology that was developed because of the ability to use hot fires to make steel and iron. It did cause a lot of pollution and some other social problems as well. It's hard to believe, but the Industrial Revolution began making life easier in 1760 and continued with great strength into 1860. 1760, let me kind of get your imagination going. That would be about 16 years before 1776 when we had our independence. So this would be the time of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and all of those people who founded our country in America from England. Let's get back into the mind of the Art Nouveau artists of 1890 to 1910. For the Art Nouveau artists, Europe and the United States had already gone through the Industrial Revolution. Actually, the Industrial Revolution, it began in England and it spread throughout Europe and it came to America. Part of the Industrial Revolution that really changed things was that machines were invented to do the work of many, many people. Look at this picture carefully. You can see these really interesting machines, and yes, that is a child. Those white, cottony looking things are spools of thread, and the thread is being woven together to make cloth. Somebody has to make cloth, and before this, cloth was made by hand. And now in factories, they could make a lot of cloth really quickly, but children did it too. Now, I want you to contrast that with this. Remember that before the Industrial Revolution, this is how cloth was made. Now, I think we all agree that, especially when it's cold, clothes come in super handy, and they're kind of like a polite thing as well. But check it out. They have different machines. They have a spinning wheel, which would take the wool or the cotton fibers and make it into thread. Then after they make the thread, they have to weave the cloth. Notice down at the bottom there's some kitty cats, and one of them is playing with a little ball of yarn or something. But this is how people actually lived. This is called a cottage industry, and women mostly would do this after they would cook or during the time they would cook, and they would tend a little garden outside. They would all get together and they'd start working on making cloth. If you look up at the rafters on the top of the picture, you're going to notice that there are bolts of cloth hanging there. Can you believe that this first version of a car, which was made by Daimler-Benz, the same people who make Mercedes in Germany, they invented this car and was invented in 1885. So for the Art Nouveau artists, the days of horse and buggy and having to do everything by hand and no technology, that was just so old-fashioned. They felt that, and they did. Human beings had really come a long way. The car evolved into this more recognizable form by 1910. So it didn't take very many years for the car to get so luxurious. Look at the leather tufted seating, and look at how heavy and massive and fancy it looks. In the back, they would pull up the top so it would be covered, kind of like what they did with, stagecoaches and things like that. Beautiful, huh? The Industrial Revolution brought to light new ideas. One of them was a new organization of work known as the factory system, which entailed increased division of labor and specialization of function. What that means is some people work on this part of the job, some people work on that part of the job, making clothes, making shoes, making whatever. And it made things go faster. Now let's contrast that again to the Industrial Revolution. If you check out this picture, notice those children there. Yes, children, two little boys. You didn't have to go back to school back then. In the 1800s, it wasn't required. In the early 1900s, you didn't have to go to school. People had to work to make a living, and every penny counted, especially if you lived in a city. And so children worked in factories. And again, if you look, you can tell by looking around with the threads and the spools of thread that they are making cloth. It was a very dangerous job, and many children got very, very hurt, and some children lost their lives. After some time, people decided that this was horrible and that we should have laws against children working. It's called child labor laws. And it began to change where students were supposed to be in school, not working in factories. With the Industrial Revolution's ability to harness the power of coal to make steel and iron, and the know-how how to make machines with moving parts to do all kinds of incredible things, the steam locomotive was invented. That changed everything because now people could travel long distances with some comfort, not on a horse or in a carriage being pulled by a horse. Or if you were really poor, you could walk. Again, with all that power of coal, hot fires, iron, steel, the knowledge to make machines with many moving parts, and the desire to make life more comfortable for people, people wanted to travel across the sea without much danger, and the steamship was invented. The picture that you're looking at is a little bit later. This is actually the Titanic that is very famous for going down into the ocean. If you look super, super close, you can see itsy bitsy tiny people and see how gigantic that machine was. It's hard to believe, but the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville, began building planes in 1899 and finally succeeded in flying the first airplane on December 17th in 1903. So by 1903, practice had already been done. Now, commercial flights like we know of them now didn't quite exist until some time later, but still the technology, the bravery, and the inventiveness and ingenuity of human beings was on the march or on the fly. With the overseas travel that steamships permitted and the long distance travel that trains provided, people wanted to be able to communicate with each other. And in fact, they had to, especially the engineers on trains and knowing what's happening up ahead, etc. People wanted to know what was happening with their loved ones. And a machine called a telegraph, which means to write from a distance in Greek, was invented. And the way it worked was a long cable was stretched between 2 points. The cable had electricity, and the electricity could be interrupted to make little pulses of electric sound. And people would write in a code called Morse code because Samuel Morse was the inventor. And then they could decode the code into A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. And you can see the two people there. They were the telegraph operators. There is a video that goes with the young lady telegraph operator. Now, for the Titanic and for steamship travel, they actually stretched an electric cable between New York City across the Atlantic Ocean on the bottom of the floor of the ocean to Europe. That's an amazing feat, don't you think so? No telephones yet, but at least being able to communicate rather quickly. What a beautiful thing. The radio is one of those inventions where a bunch of people were thinking of something along those lines at the same time. So when you read about who invented the radio, there's all kinds of different things that were happening all at the same time. We call that synchronicity. Well, the radio was invented and it changed the way that people enjoyed life. You could get news very quickly when news was happening because remember, no TV during this time. And also, you could hear people sing and tell jokes and read aloud and tell stories on the radio. And it captured everybody's imagination. So, as you see, for the Art Nouveau artists, in their eyes, they were modern people. And the old style of art didn't reflect all the changes that were happening in the world all around them, how human beings were really mastering the world to make it a more comfortable place. Instead of being a victim of Earth, they were beginning to control their environments with more ease. And it brought in more time to enjoy themselves as well. So for the Art Nouveau artist, there is no going back. Belle Epoque, bring on the new and modern. And if you look at this wallpaper, it's by William Morris, and he was an American actually. And you can see that it's got the beautiful movement. And remember, Art Nouveau is all about line and nature and beauty. It's a rather interesting contrast that Art Nouveau was born from a reaction of wanting to separate from the past and move into the modern future. And so much was industrialized, and industrialization really helped to make things more comfortable, and it made many kinds of things like this architecture possible. And it's interesting to me that the focus of Art Nouveau, the aesthetic, the style, the motif, was always nature. Nature, beautiful lines, evoking nature. Look through everything and see how organic the lines are. That's what Art Nouveau is all about. Can you believe that these are still standing? There was 141 about that number that were originally made, and 80 some still exist. And they're made out of metal, and the style is definitely Art Nouveau. You can see those sinuous, elegant, meandering lines and those very unusual curves. Well, this is Paris, France, and Paris, France was the center of the universe for Art Nouveau. This is actually a synagogue someplace in Europe, not in France. And a synagogue is where Jewish people go to worship. And this just looks like a fairy tale house. Look at the little hearts, and look how that fence looks like it's almost going to fall over. But look how colorful and pretty, and the fence looks like it's almost alive because of all the movement in the design. The same with the architecture. In art, when we say architecture, what we're talking about is the art and science of building buildings. Are you beginning to be able to identify some of the elements or characteristics of Art Nouveau? Sinuous, meandering, flowing, elegant, line, curvilinear, curved lines, nature, pretty, beautiful women. That's what it's all about. Isn't this gorgeous? This is actually a dining hall, and you can see all the glass so that the light comes in. Isn't that beautiful? Now, this is Art Nouveau, and can you tell me why that's Art Nouveau? What makes this obviously in the Art Nouveau style? It's made out of lines. It has a natural motif. Motif is like a theme, and the theme here is leaves. And I also see some shapes that really remind me of flowers too. And Art Nouveau always focuses on nature, and it's fantasy, it's dreamy. This is Art Nouveau also. Look at again. Do we see lines? Are they curvilinear? That means curved. Is there a focus on nature? Is there a focus that seems to be like fantasy, dreamlike, better than real life? Bringing the outdoors and nature into the inside. I love this artist style. It's just so feminine and so pretty. And yes, that word is biscuits, and it's French, and biscuits are actually in overseas in Europe. A biscuit is not like what we think about, like biscuits and gravy. Biscuits are cookies. And so this is an advertisement poster for cookies. And even the advertisements were gorgeous. Notice the focus. Is it Art Nouveau? Does it have a lot of line? Are the lines curvilinear? Is it focus on nature and beauty? Does it have a beautiful girl in it? Is it bringing the outside to the inside? If you see all of that and a lot of movement, then it's Art Nouveau. Is this Art Nouveau? Is the focus of the artwork on line, on long, sinuous, meandering, elegant, curvilinear line? Are there beautiful women or beautiful people? If you think so, it's Art Nouveau.